We kindly invite you to proceed between the photographs displayed in the halls of Palazzo Grassi. Perhaps you're in the historic Venetian palace right now. Or perhaps you're approaching or planning to visit the Chronorama exhibition soon. In any case, take your time and close your eyes for a moment. Imagine yourself on the sidewalk of the Saint-Michel Boulevard in Paris. Saint-Michel is one of the two main avenues of the Latin Quarter, on the famous Rive Gauche of the Seine, a popular area for the intellectuals and bohemians of the 1940s to the 1960s. So popular, in fact, that it's even become a bit of a stereotype, a cliché. Just mention Rive Gauche and you'll see spring to mind the silhouette of a man in coat reading an old newspaper outside a bistro, or perhaps even a beautiful girl in beret and rain jacket crossing the street. Just think Rive Gauche and picture Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, Miles Davis and Juliette Gréco. So let's travel back to Palazzo Grassi instead. There is a photograph taken on the Saint-Michel Boulevard that talks of a different time, a time of suffering and humiliation. This photograph was taken many years ago, in 1944. August 25th, 1944, is the day of liberation from the German occupation. Thousands of people flood the streets. On the occasion, de Gaulle gives a historic speech at the Hôtel de Ville, and the next day he'll march down the Champs-Élysées, almost 2 meters tall and flanked by tanks and crowds of ecstatic Parisians.
Le général de Gaulle, chef du gouvernement provisoire de la République française, va traverser la capitale sur un tapis valant d'acclamations.
Paris is free. Simone de Beauvoir writes that, on the street, children sang, "Nous ne les reverrons plus. C'est fini, ils sont foutus." We will never see them again. It's over. They are screwed. And remember that on warm September nights, one could walk the city streets once again. The cafes closed early, but when we left the tables outside the Rue Marie, we still had the sidewalks, the benches, the streets. A soon-to-be world-famous photographer was wandering around just about a month before the Nazis would finally be driven out. Robert Doisneau, born in 1912 in Gentilly. At the time of the photo displayed at Palazzo Grassi, Doisneau was 32 years old. In the left half of the photo, later published in Vogue, we can partially see the tops of the buildings along the boulevard. Only partially, however, because the rest is hidden by a barricade built of bricks and sandbags. And in the other half of the photo, a dialogue is taking place. We see 7 young battle-readied members of the French resistance. They're in shirts with sleeves, with rifles and ammunition belts slung over their shoulders, and they're roughly surrounding an 8th figure, a Catholic priest named Camille Folliet, hero of the resistance and then a prisoner of the Nazis. He will die in April 1945, towards the end of the war. What strikes us about the photo, the center of it, or what critic Roland Barthes would call its punctum, is Camille Folliet's ironic and amused smile. The group of resistance fighters is looking at the priest and listening to his words. It's almost as if we can hear Doisneau's photograph speak to us. The priest, skinny and unshaven, seems to be telling the resistance fighters a joke, but a joke carrying a moral truth. Everyone is paying deep attention to his wise words. Two of the resistance fighters hold cigarettes in their lips. These cigarettes bring to mind the typical dark poses of Hollywood actors. Doisneau was able to capture, in the midst of the street-by-street battle, that bit of cinematic glamour that Vogue simply craved. Robert Doisneau was part of the humanist photography movement. This artistic approach was closely related to photojournalism, and it focused on depicting human life and daily routines. The humanist photographer was a hunter seeking humanity and human dignity, and so what was captured on film were affectionate gazes, intimate gestures, workers on their lunch break, or a child sucking their thumb. Fleeting and ephemeral moments that appeared for just an instant and would then melt back into the crowd of the streets. Doisneau's most famous photo is the celebrated Kiss by the Hôtel de Ville, published in Life in 1950. A man vigorously kisses a woman along a sidewalk amidst a stream of passers-by. If Doisneau's kiss has become the perfect postcard of a certain Parisian romanticism, the photo he took in August 1944 with Camille Folliet and the resistance fighters, while not being quite as popular, is certainly no less human and vital. In both photos, Doisneau was able to capture that rare moment of warmth and humanity that he would always seek. Let's stay in France and on the pages of Vogue. The war has been over for a while, and most cities have been rebuilt. It is an era of prosperity, hope, and full employment. It is in this context that a new moral code of beauty, elegance, and sophisticated lifestyle comes to be. It's a specific imagery and aesthetic that has never really left us since. Let's think of icons from the 1950s like Cary Grant and Dean Martin. A certain movie tradition that even today is kept alive by actors such as George Clooney. A 1958 photo taken in France by Lionel Kazan, a Monegasque fashion photographer, drops us right in the midst of that elegant and worldly universe of distinction, humor, wealth, and new moral values. The photo was taken on the French Riviera on the set of the film Bonjour Tristesse, directed by Otto Preminger and later published in Vogue. The film was based on the eponymous novel by French writer Françoise Sagan. The photo features actors David Niven and Deborah Kerr. Both are wearing Givenchy clothing, their bodies languidly and idly leaning against the side of a convertible automobile. In the background, the trunks and branches of two palm trees indicate that the man and woman are somewhere near the sea. But it is the interplay between sporty elegance and the couple's infectious smiles that shape the image and communicate an entire universe of values, a typically 50s idea of style. Casual, classy, and sophisticated all at once. But this narrative, projected by David Niven and Deborah Kerr with their radiant smiles, is only true in part. The fashion photography of the time, after all, would only focus on the white and wealthy part of the world, ignoring entire peoples, cultures, and continents from its gaze. However, there are some photographs which offer a broader, more open and curious vision. Let's take two photos as an example. The first is the Cuzco children. The city of Cuzco is located at an altitude of about 3,400 meters in southeastern Peru. Before the Spanish conquest of 1533, it had been the capital of the Incan Empire. To give context, tours of the ruins of Machu Picchu depart today from Cuzco. At Christmas 1948, a great American photographer named Irving Penn arrived in Cuzco. Penn had a particular love for South America. He had tried for years to become a painter, but had given up. He joined Vogue in 1943 as an assistant to Alexander Lieberman, then the magazine's art director. Later, Lieberman discovered Penn's qualities as a photographer and decided to give him more and more space, making Penn one of the most important photographers in the history of Vogue. After shooting a fashion spread in Peru for Vogue, Penn traveled to Cuzco, where he rented a photographer's studio, paid some locals to pose, and then took a very long series of portraits. In Cuzco Children, we see a boy and a girl, very different from the girl photographed in 1919 for Vogue, which we talked about in the previous episode. If the other girl was clearly a projection of the Western, educated, and wealthy elite, the two children from Cuzco are barefoot and pose with their feet on the slabs of pavement sprinkled with water stains. Like Charlie Chaplin's urchin, they wear shabby clothes that just don't fit. The expression on their faces is serious and focused. Between the boy and the girl is an old three-legged table. The two rest their elbows and forearms on the tabletop, holding hands tenderly. A 19th century photographic printing technique called platinotype gives the picture warm and deep grays, which makes the children's expressions even more severe. They almost look like a married couple, photographed on an important day. Indeed, Irving Penn's shooting took place around Christmas time. The photo will be published in Vogue in 1962 and then exhibited at the Marlborough Gallery in London in 1977. If Irving Penn always sought the right opportunity to push Vogue's aesthetic further, the choices of American photographer Diane Arbus would be even more radical and unsettling. Diane Arbus and her husband Alan Arbus had opened a studio in Midtown Manhattan in 1946 and had begun working for magazines such as Glamour, 17, and Vogue. Diane Arbus later began that unique and personal search that would make her a legend and the precursor of a certain photographic and artistic genre that delves into the invisible depths of humanity. Indeed, Diane Arbus began photographing eerie pairs of twins, people with dwarfism in Manhattan hotel rooms, bodies entirely covered in tattoos, and men dressed as women. Her story was original, unconventional, and above all, real. It could not have been further from the pictures of Vogue or Vanity Fair in the 1950s and 1960s. Diane Arbus would commit suicide in 1971, and thus she would ascend to a sort of sainthood. Among the photos on display at Palazzo Grassi, there are two shots taken with her husband and a beautiful and lively portrait of the two taken in 1950 by Francis McLaughlin Gill. The writer and philosopher Susan Sontag dedicated pages of impressive acumen and lucidity to Diane Arbus. In the famous essay On Photography, Sontag wrote that Arbus's success, especially in the 1970s, was due to the fact that while the audience of the 1950s wanted to be comforted by a sentimental humanism, the audience of the 1970s, on the contrary, wanted to be disturbed. The relationship between Susan Sontag and Diane Arbus is almost a sort of a duel. A fantastic portrait of Susan Sontag dated 1966 and published in Vogue is also on display at Palazzo Grassi. We will discuss Susan Sontag and photographers such as David Bailey and Helmut Newton in the third and final chapter of Chronorama, focusing on the 1960s and 1970s.